And the talks are recorded, and there's a YouTube channel with all the talks since I've been teaching here. It's 220 talks now. There's also 2 books that I've written since I've been teaching here that were specifically written out of the need to be able to language as clearly as I could what this process is about, this process of waking up to the reality of yourself, the implications of that psychologically, and how that could make a difference. And because I'm a psychologist, this is important to me because it's what I do, right? And it was a revolution for me to discover that there was a way of working with people that had far more potential than the limited way that I had been trained to. It's true, it's changed the way I do psychotherapy with people dramatically. One of the biggest frustrations in my life was being trained as a psychotherapist and discovering how little difference I could make with people. Using the traditional approach to psychotherapy, which is that you're treating people who come to you because they're disordered, something's wrong with them, and then you use these different theoretical models and practices to treat them and change them and make them a better person. It's a self-improvement project. And it's inherently very limited for an infinite number of reasons. But the thing about it, when I discovered meditation and these Eastern teachings that really opened up a completely new possibility, was that I discovered that the biggest problem that people have psychologically and emotionally is the misunderstanding they have about who they are. That they think they are a psychological entity and a physical body, and once you're in that world, you're neurotic. Right? But if you come to see that that's not actually the case, and it is possible for you to come out of that persistent delusion, even though most humanity lives in that delusion, and it's the cause of all the suffering and insanity in the world, but it is nonetheless impossible to come out of that delusion, and meditation is one of the ways to do that. And when you're practicing meditation the way I am teaching it in terms of the Zen approach, we say just sit, and then they say just sit. Well, there's the reason why they say just sit, and the reason they say just sit is because if you just sit, what that means is you are not meditating. Right? It's not I am sitting, no, just sit. Not I am sitting, just sit. And if you just sit, what there is just sitting. And what that means is you will be aware of the body, you will be aware of the breath, right? You will be aware of the body sitting. That's different than thinking about sitting. Just like it's different to live your life with a direct awareness of what's happening versus thinking about what's happening. And so when you practice meditation, if you're practicing it correctly, you're simply being aware of sitting. And it's non-dual. And the teachings in the East tell us that non-duality is the truth. In modern quantum physics, you could say it's called the unified field, meaning that although, for example, all gold jewelry is gold, when we look at jewelry, we see different pieces of jewelry. You see a necklace, an earring, a ring, whatever, today a nose ring, whatever. But it's all the same thing. That's the unity of it. It's all gold. No matter what appearance it takes, it's all gold. And the philosophies from the East tell us the same thing. That no matter what appearance the world takes, it's all consciousness. And therefore, when you practice meditation in a non-dual way, you're practicing simply being actually experiencing what's happening, and what's happening is sitting. Just experiencing sitting. Not you sitting, because the you that you normally inject into things it doesn't actually exist. That's the problem. That's the mistake. Right? So it's my body, my life, my money, my car, my meditation practice, my spiritual existence. And this perpetuates a phantom. It perpetuates the idea that what you are is this psychological construct that has no actual existence other than a psychological construct, right? Which is much different from the way people experience it, people experience it to be the truth of who they are. I don't just believe that I'm a personality, I live as a personality. I don't just believe I'm a physical body, I live as a physical body. And that's a big, big mistake. So in this form of meditation, we practice a non-dual approach to meditation. And that's different from stress reduction. And it's very important to be clear that you're practicing that, because even if you understand the concept of practicing that way, you might end up finding yourself being a person meditating anyway, because that's the habit. Everybody's in the habit of being a person. You know, the person claims everything. If you look at it, the person claims everything. There's nothing you could say that the person says that that's not mine. It's not just thoughts, it's my thoughts. It's not just feelings, it's my feelings, right? And so this has been inserted through conditioning in your brain in order for you to function in the world as we know it, as a separate self, living in time and space, and believing that you're something that you're not. No wonder people have problems. Now, so in this work, in these teachings that go along with practicing meditation, there are two facets of it. The first facet is, for somebody who comes to this cold, who comes to this completely convinced that they are a person in a physical body, they have to go through a period of hearing the teaching. It's called the Dharma, hearing the truth, right? And that teaching is expressed conceptually. It's expressed through concepts, through language, which is dualistic, but that's all we have. And it can be expressed through concepts if you understand that concepts are not the truth. The concepts are referring to the truth. The truth is only experiential. So the first part is to expose yourself to the concepts of the teaching, and then to examine those concepts and see if you understand them thoroughly enough, right, for you to begin to then come to a conclusion whether you accept and agree with those concepts or not, or whether you don't. And if you don't, that's the end of the process. There's no point going any further, right? If you do, then the next step is to investigate the concepts in your personal direct experience. For example, one of the concepts is thinking just happens. You are not thinking. It goes back to what I just said. There is no such thing as a you that's thinking. Right? And so you can hear the concept, you can hear it explained, you get examples of it and so forth. But it's only when you get to a point where you're convinced that the concepts are pointing to something that is true, that you then look at the thought process that's occurring for you in your own personal experience and notice that you don't know what you're going to think until after the thought occurs. You can't argue with that. That's evidence, right? So that's the first section of the whole process, right? And then if you get to a point where you actually look and see what the evidence suggests is the case, and you're convinced that it's true because you actually tested it, right? Then you go on to the second phase, which is, I like this works, I see it, it's clear to me, I've checked it out, I've tested it, the evidence demonstrates that it's actually true, and now I want to have enlightenment. I want to be enlightened. I want to experience my life as an enlightened person. Please tell me how to do that. This is where most people get stuck. It's called the seeking process, right? And so they get a guru, they take yoga classes, they practice Tai Chi Cha, they read the books, you know, they read the life of Siddhartha, you know, they go to retreats, they become a vegetarian, and go to a meditation class. Right? And they do all that because there's this popular understanding that if you practice enough and if you do the right things, right? If you do the right things and you practice enough, at some point the blessing will occur. At some point you, just like Eckhart Tolle, will find yourself enlightened. And once that happens, bliss, it's bliss. It's over. You have no more concerns. You might as well take the sheet off your bed and put it around you, and get some flowers and just sit in the corner. Because after that, life is just bliss, right? That's the big misunderstanding about enlightenment. That's why there are billions of dollars being spent every year by people chasing enlightenment, going to retreats, going to India, getting a guru, On and on and on. And that can go on for the rest of your life, because I listen to these interactions between students and teachers, and the students are always saying the same thing. Different variations, but always the same thing. I had it and I lost it. I had a glimpse of it. Or I haven't had it, but I believe in it. You know, help me, help me, help me. You know, what am I doing wrong? You know, touch me, bless me, give me kundalini. Do something, please, right? And of course, the teachers do their best sometimes to provide support and assistance, and other times they don't do their best to do that, because I don't want to send the customer away, right? And so they just say, meditate longer, come back to my next retreat, buy my next book, you know, and on and on. Buy a figurine of me and put it in your bedroom, you know. But there are teachers out there that are legitimate and authentic, and their legitimacy is based on the fact that they tell you at the outset, right, that this is not something that is going to happen to you. This is not a blessing. People like Eckhart Tolle and Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta were all very fortunate that they were blessed with a instantaneous enlightenment, and it happens, but it is so rare it's not worth talking about. What is more realistic and can happen is a gradual awakening process. And there are specific things that you can learn and do in order to have that gradual awakening process. One of them is meditation. And the thing that you have to understand about all this is that if you thoroughly understand the teachings, if you thoroughly understand the concept, if you thoroughly understand the possibility, right? If you thoroughly understand that, then what that does is it creates a possible world, right? It creates a possible existence. It creates a possible way of experiencing yourself in your life. That's obviously very attractive, right? Because the definition of nirvana, the definition of enlightenment, is the absence of suffering. What could you want more in life than the absence of suffering? You know, some people say what they want more than anything is happiness. Well, what's happiness? The absence of suffering. If you never suffered, you'd obviously be happy, right? So everybody on the planet's up to the same thing. Only 98% of them are so lost that they'll probably die before they ever get any evidence of anything that's going to make any difference, right? The others are either fortunate to have fallen and banged their head and became enlightened, which is very rare, or they've come into contact with the Dharma. They've come into contact with these teachings. And part of what these teachings say is if that's happened, that it's your karma. If that's happened, it means that somehow your psychological, emotional self is ready enough to hear the calling, you know, ready enough to understand the teachings when you hear them. And so that's a blessing, they say, right? But then, as I said, there's the first phase, and that takes a process. You know, I was listening to a Advaita Vedanta teacher today talk about this, and the Vedanta is an ancient Hindu teaching. Advaita Vedanta is the ancient Hindu teaching about non-duality, because Advaita means not two, non-dual. And he was saying that in the initial process, there is an exact self-inquiry process that goes on where you examine things like I mentioned earlier about your thoughts aren't your thoughts, or you're not your body. And you can actually go through a very specific way of doing that examination so that the evidence is obvious, right? And you can't refute the evidence. And then that gradually moves you through your confusion and your questions to a place where you experience conviction. Then the question becomes, okay, I am convinced, it's clear to me, I see it clearly, understand the concepts, but I am not experiencing being an enlightened person in this world. What do I need to do? The first thing that you have to understand is that the reason for that, the reason why just knowing about it or understanding the concepts doesn't make a difference, is because you are a completely programmed robot. You are a completely programmed computer and machine. Your brain has been absolutely conditioned from the beginning of your life, almost the beginning of your life. And that was taken on board to be reality. And that was taken on board to be real and be all there is, and you've been living in that reality all along with most other people. Right? And so that's the programming in the computer. That's the program that's running all the time, right? And so no matter what you learn, no matter what concepts you learn, that program will continue to run the same way as it always has. And you've been practicing living your life through that program 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for as long as you've been alive, almost, as long as you've been alive. There was a little period when you were a baby before the programming started to take hold, when you were actually enlightened. You were actually just experiencing what was happening, right? And then you became neurotic. So the way to get out of the situation is, the first thing you have to understand is what the situation is. And the situation is you're hypnotized. You're hypnotized. What they call it in some of the teachings is the divine hypnosis. Divine hypnosis. You came into this world, right, of time and space, in which reality was a subject-object possibility, a subject-object situation, right? Your body you identify with your body, you're separate from other people, you're separate from the world, you're living time and space, and the game's on. That's the human life, right? And so the conditioning is not a bad thing, it's not a mistake, it's a necessary aspect of being in this world. You can't be in this world and have interpersonal relationships, live in time and space, and all the rest of it, without being exposed to the hypnosis, where you believe that you are a body and a person. However, along with that comes suffering, because along with being in this world and living in time means everything's impermanent, right? And living in time is you're separate from everybody else in the world, and you have to negotiate, compete, survive as a person, survive economically, survive physically, deal with life, try and save the planet. All that is part of the deal, part of the game that's getting played. Right? And so if you're suffering enough that you want out, or if you stumble into learning about these teachings and you discover that there is a possibility of freedom from suffering, then you become interested in these things, and it will take a real commitment of your attention and energy in order to go through this process, because it involves coming out of a hypnotic state, coming out of a trance. Right? And not only is it a hypnotic state or a trance, but it is probably the most powerful hypnotic state and trance that's possible. The evidence for that is watch the evening news, right? The evidence for that is that 99.9% of people on the planet are living in this hypnotic state. And they are interacting with one another to continually maintain and revivify this hypnotic state to be a reality. So when you start to come out of that, whether it's because you have short glimpses of the truth, which happens for people, self-actualizing experiences, right? Or you take some LSD, that's done the job for some people. Did it for me when I was a hippie back in the 70s, right? Or you find yourself in some life crisis, right, where you get a terminal diagnosis, or the person to you closest in the world dies, or your child dies. Then you start to really need to re-examine any possibility that's available. So the second phase of how do you come out of the trance involves using your ability to pay attention, which you develop through practicing meditation. That's part of what you're practicing, developing your ability to pay attention. And then learning that you must pay attention consistently, moment to moment, in such a way that you see how who you're not keeps maintaining its existence. So it's called the negation process, right? You have to pay attention to what you're not operating. You have to pay attention to the machinery operating, to the program playing, right? And recognize it for what it is. See for yourself in action as you're living that the phantom you thought was you is living your life, and not in a very effective way. Therefore you suffer. Therefore your relationships are confusing and complicated. Therefore you find yourself anxious and depressed and on prescribed medication. Or you come and see me, and then I have to put up with listening to your stories. And so, if you're going to help them at all, even in a self-improvement sense, you have to very gradually start to hint to them that they may have something to do with it. I used to say when I worked in the prisons, and I worked with prisoners, who always claimed that they were innocent. I don't blame them. But I used to say to them, if you look in your life at all the instances where you got busted and all the instances where things went bad and didn't work and you suffered, they were always different circumstances, different people, places, and things. The one thing that was the same was you were there. It starts to become suspicious, right? That's what I mean when I say the evidence speaks much louder than the bullshit that you believe, right? So this process of realizing the truth involves practicing formal meditation, which I described earlier, right? And if you practice it correctly, while you're practicing your being who you are, while you're practicing non-duality, while you're practicing not being who you're not. So it's not me sitting here meditating, it's just sitting. And when you practice that, you begin to create a new possibility in your brain. Oh, maybe it's possible to exist in this world without thinking. Maybe just being aware of what's happening can work. Maybe there's a natural intelligence that this awareness that is actually what I am can interact with life in a way that has things work naturally. Maybe that's possible. That starts to dawn on you if you practice meditation consistently and stay out of the thought process, which is a tall order in and of itself, right? But then you begin to verify, okay, that I'm getting this. It's starting to make a difference in my life as I live my life, because I'm catching myself be crazy. I'm catching myself. The way this occurred to me when it first happened was I began to realize if I kept my mouth shut, my life went better, especially in relationship to my wife. So I could still think she was a bitch, but if I didn't say it, we wouldn't have to fight. But then I realized even when I thought I was thinking she was a bitch, it wasn't me thinking that she was a bitch. It was a voice in my head thinking that she was a bitch, just like my mother. That's psychoanalytic stuff, right? It's like a friend of mine said the other day, he said, I was talking, he was a psychiatrist. He says, I was talking at lunch with another psychiatrist, and I was sharing that I had a Freudian slip. Freudian slip.
That's the most... Yes.
And the psychiatrist was sharing with another psychiatrist, I had a Freudian slip today. He says, in the middle of having a conversation with my father, I said, and you're the fucking bastard that ruined my fucking life. Freudian slip. So anyway, this other part does require that you first make contact with the reality of the situation, which means that you're hypnotized, and then secondly, understand that you have to develop your ability to pay attention in the formal practice of meditation. Obviously, that's part of the practice, right? But then if you're really committed to realizing the possibility of enlightenment, you have to begin to practice the informal meditation, which one of the teachers calls the eyes open form of meditation, meaning that when you're not on the cushion, when you're not practicing formal meditation, you're still practicing meditation, and the practice of meditation is one in which you're using various techniques, right, to come out of the imbalance now. So the imbalance is that the truth is out of balance with the illusion. In other words, the illusion is weighing the scale down, right? You're living in the illusion, right? When you learn the concepts that show you what the truth is like, right, and then practicing this form of active meditation in your waking hours, right, you begin to practice seeing the non-dual way of seeing things. This is what I've been talking about recently in the class. You begin to practice seeing what's happening from a non-dual perspective, from a perspective of the truth of the way things are. And of course you have to have developed everything I spoke about before to be able to do that. But when you do that, then you can bring the scale back into balance, where now I may think I'm a person, I may be operating in this world as a person, but I know the truth, and therefore I am no longer at the effect of that limited way of existing. Therefore I don't suffer anymore, because I know who I am never suffers. Because I know who I am is awareness itself. Right? And I can bring that to bear on whatever situation I'm in and transform it immediately. So one person asked a saint, a woman who was considered to be fully realized, a fully realized person, an enlightened person, do you remember who you really are all the time? Big question, right? You're enlightened. Do you remember who you are all the time? Do you remember that your awareness and consciousness itself all the time, and who you really are never suffers? Do you remember that all the time? And you know what her answer was? No. If I remembered that all the time, I couldn't function in the world. But it's there when I need it. That's the balance. So we're not talking about, not being a body or a person and not living in that world anymore. That's not realistic. That's not possible. We're talking about practicing in such a way that you actually spend more time paying attention to the truth than the lie. So you counterbalance the situation for a while, right? And after it's counterbalanced for a while, it starts to come back into balance where you can be in the world and not of the world. Where you can experience the peace that path this understanding and at the same time be actively involved in the world as we know it. That's what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is not change, it's transformation. Enlightenment is not changing who you are, it's knowing the truth. It's not changing how you think, it's knowing what thinking really is. It's seeing things as they are. And when you see things as they are, they don't have to change because you don't believe bullshit anymore. You see the truth, right? And then you begin to be able to live in that way, still as a person, still neurotic, still as an asshole, still make mistakes, still everything in life to learn as long as you're alive, right? And at the same time, free from the negative consequences of living that limited existence. And so that's what it's all about, right? And that's the work to be done if you're serious about wanting to realize the possibility of being enlightened. And enlightenment is real. Enlightenment is something that I think is starting to come out of the closet, in the sense that in the past it was understood to be something that was esoteric, something that was mystical, something that was magical, something that you were hope would happen to you, right? But with brain science and these newer understandings and people from the East who are translating these wisdom teachings into contemporary language, we're discovering that enlightenment is something you can actually consistently develop an experience of in time and realize. It is available. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. But when you consider what it is, it's still worth it. When you consider what it is, it's still worth it. And it's the kind of thing that as you go through the gradual process of awakening, there are fruits to be had along the way. So even if you're not, and I know some of you in this class who I've spoken to personally, even if you're not completely enlightened 100% of the time, you already see the benefits. You already see the benefits. You, as I said, you stop being so stupid in terms of your behavior. You may still think like a stupid person, but you're aware enough to know that you should keep that to yourself. The same thing is true with enlightenment. If you understand enlightenment and you understand the game of life, right, and how everything works, you keep that to yourself, right? Because if you try and talk to people who are living 100% in the other world, they start to question your sanity. Which is interesting because in reality, when you see things as they are, right, this is about going sane. This is about coming out of being nuts and acting nuts and creating negative consequences. And the people who would call you insane are completely, as the Buddhists say, hungry ghosts, lost in the dream, thinking that the dream is reality. So, okay, have a good night. See you next time.